right, so my focus this morning is Hebrews 1, or Hebrews 11, verse 1. Now, as Manny said, our intent is basically to preach just a couple different things from this chapter, and the desire behind that is just, we've done this before where the three of us have spoken, and it was encouraging, but, it's kind of like if you're going to do it, you got to maybe work it together somehow. What are we each going to talk about that has something to do with what the other person's going to talk about? And as we were coming into the new year, I guess without sounding too cliche, it just seemed like a good fit. Let's talk about walking in faith as the year begins. And so this chapter seemed to fit well. Now I think what's encouraging is you all might think that before we do it, we talk to one another, we discuss what we're going to preach and how we're going to do it, and then we fit it all together, and we don't really do that. So I don't know what they're going to preach, and they don't really know that much what I'm going to preach, but so it's just like you all. We find as we come here how all of this works together in what one another preaches, and I think the Lord just works that out. So I'm encouraged to hear what they have to say, but hopefully I don't say too much of what they have to say. My focus, though, is this. Verse 1 says here, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Now, I didn't intend to preach this verse. Actually, I intended to preach a different one, but as I prepared the sermon off of a different verse, I pretty much only prepared stuff off of this verse. And so I just scrapped the old verse, and then I was left with everything with this one. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to spend our time here. And my focus is really this. I just want to give you encouragement to live by faith, to live daily by faith, to stir you up that you would operate by faith. Because that is, brethren, how the Christian life is to be lived. I've been going through Romans with Sergio, and right there at the end of Romans chapter 1, he gives us that statement that from faith to faith. And the idea really is that it's from faith from beginning to end. From start to finish, the whole thing is by faith. And if you look down here, verse 6, we read the chapter, so you heard it. But verse 6, it says, without him, it is impossible, or without faith, it is impossible to please him. So you see, faith is absolutely central to the Christian life. And not only is it impossible to please him without faith, but look what it says, that he rewards those who seek him. So this is our intent, to spend the time here upon living with faith. So brethren, may God help us to walk and live in faith. So I want to consider this definition. I think this is a very good definition, very biblical definition, very basic definition. Not a lot of things here that can get us tripped up and confused. So look at it again. Verse 1, faith is, so here's his definition. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. So here's the idea. Faith has to do with assurance and has to do with hope. But it doesn't mean hope in the same way that you and I kind of say hope, right? What do we say? Well, I hope I ordered a book from Amazon and I really hope that it comes here, right? But we know what that means. It means it's probably not coming. And I'm going to be really upset that it doesn't come, right? But hope doesn't mean that biblically. Hope means something more biblically, like we know that this is going to happen. Hope isn't just wishful thinking. Hope is knowing that what God has said will come to pass. No questions asked. So we have hope that springs forth from the living God. But if you see here, the second part, he says that that second element there, conviction of things not seen. So it's a solid conviction, it's a solid confidence in what is not seen. That is a little bit odd for us. Because, listen, I recognize that if we say the words blind faith, I was talking about this with Henry a couple days ago. When we say the words blind faith, typically that has a bit of a stigma. We don't really like that. We don't like when someone says, we walk by blind faith, and those words just don't ring so well in our ears because nobody really wants to be accused of doing something just blindly. But the fact of the matter is, brethren, the Bible speaks this way about faith. It does. It certainly is portrayed that way, at least here in verse 1. And just think for a minute, all right? Let me ask you this. What do you call someone who can't see? Right? They're blind. That's what that means. When you can't see, you're blind. And so we are people who have faith when something isn't seen. We have faith in things not seen, it says there in verse 1. And you can call that whatever you want, brethren, but to me that sounds like blind faith. Does it not? That's what it sounds like to me. And here's my point. I don't think that is a problem. I don't take offense at that. I'm not offended by that reality. I think that's a biblical reality. So let me just at least give you a bit of clarification. Because again, sometimes it just doesn't sit right. So what I don't mean when I say blind faith is what the atheist means. What does the atheist mean when he says blind faith? He means you have absolutely no reason to believe or have faith, and yet you do anyway. And the problem with that is that there is reason for faith, but the atheist just thinks that reason isn't sufficient. That doesn't mean that there isn't reason. There is. But he just doesn't think that it mounts up to what he wants. I do think, brethren, that we have good reason for faith. But it's not because of sight. Brethren, we don't believe things. We don't walk by sight. We walk by faith. And that's what the atheist thinks. That's why he thinks there's no reason. He wants something that's seen. He's looking for things that are seen. He's got it backwards. He's saying, let me see and then I'll believe. And the Bible says the Christian has faith even though they don't see. The atheist has got it backwards. Faith is there. Why? Because God put it there. You don't have faith because someone just convinced you enough to have faith. You have faith because God gave you faith. You have faith because God just did it that way. He caused you to be born again. It's of the Spirit. You have faith in the Word because God gave you faith in the Word. And you believe that it is certain. It can't fail. It can't fall. It can't fail to do what God said it was going to do. But make no mistake about it, brethren. To the onlooking world, to the lost world, it often does seem like we have faith that we have no reason to have because they don't understand why it's there. And not only that, oftentimes it may look like we're walking in faith when there's contrary reason to believe so. But again, faith is not rooted in what we see. It's rooted in what we know. And that seems maybe a little bit odd. I mean, how can you know something and you don't even see something? And I think the point is this. We know it because we know it from another. We don't know it of ourselves. We know it because of the knowing of another. Listen, blindness does not necessitate uncertainty. Do you know what I mean when I'm saying that? Saying we have blind faith or the Christian has blind faith doesn't mean that they are necessarily uncertain about truth and reality. Blindness simply means that the confidence that we do have, if we're going to have any, is not rooted in what we see, but what God sees. It's not rooted in what we know, but what God knows. It's rooted in the seeing of another. Listen, let me kind of paint this picture a little bit. You imagine a boy. He's blind. And he's got his father by his side, and his father takes him by the hand, and he leads him everywhere he's got to go. The father won't lead the boy into the street. He won't lead him into danger. He won't lead him into any kind of peril. But he looks out for him. He takes him by the hand, and he looks out for him. And the boy would have no reason to doubt So long as he trusts his father, he might not be able to see. But you know what? His father can see. And though he is blind, listen to this. Though the boy might be blind, he actually can have just as much confidence in what the reality is that he cannot see as the one who can see, if he has reason to trust his father. He can have just as much confidence in him. Listen, if the father says to the boy, don't go into the street, there is a car coming, even though the boy can't actually see the car, he has no reason to doubt that that is a reality that he cannot see. If his father is trustworthy, if his father's got a good word, if his father's word is true, the boy knows what the reality is, even if he can't see it. And he's got reason to have confidence in it. Now think of it, brethren. You think of it. I think Nick sent a quote out that said something like this at some point. I couldn't find it and I couldn't remember who it was, so this isn't necessarily my own, but I couldn't remember whose it was. But think of this. We have God directing our path, which means this. We have the assurance of direction from an omniscient mind and an omnipotent hand. We have assurance of the direction that we're going because of God's omniscient, all-knowing mind and His all-powerful hand. Brethren, what is there to not trust when we have that? What is there to not have confidence in? You see, no one can comprehend the incomprehensible, omniscient mind of God, and yet that is the mind that guides us. No one can restrain the almighty, omnipotent hand of God, and yet that is the hand that takes hold of ours and leads us. Brethren, our faith might be blind in some sense because we cannot see in totality, but our faith is rooted in the surety of the living God. It has even something more strong of a foundation than just being able to see. Our faith is the internal gazing of the spiritual eyes upon truth that can't be seen with the physical eyes. It's conviction, though we cannot see all that we are convicted about and trust in. We hold on to what we hope for, brethren. We hold on to it. We cling to it with an absolutely sure confidence. Are any of you doubting in here that on that final day you're going to stand before God? I mean, I hope not. Because that is true, brethren. That's true. On that final day, you'll stand before the living God. You know what else is absolutely true? If you're in Jesus Christ, you won't be cast out. That's true. You better believe it. You could take it to the bank. The fact of the matter is, biblical faith, as it is defined here, is absolute confidence in the midst of blindness. It's a paradox. It's unwavering belief. You're unswayed. Belief that doesn't move in what you can't see. It's unbelievable. So listen, I want you to consider just some of the people in this chapter. These are examples, undoubtedly, of blind faith. Think of Abraham. Abraham's listed here. And while it doesn't say it necessarily here, you know what it says about Abraham? I mean, if we're going to define Abraham's faith, in Romans chapter 4, it says that in hope he believed what? Against hope. He believed against any reason to believe. He had hope when there was no reason to have hope, that God would give him a child. Brethren, it says that he knew his body was as good as dead. It was useless. And yet he believed God no matter what. He believed him anyway. His body was as good as dead, so was Sarah's. And he said, nope, I'm going to believe God anyway. Don't tell me, brethren, that in Abraham's case, there was sufficient evidence that would force him to have this particular verdict. In Abraham's case, there was sufficient evidence for the opposite. There was no evidence there of what he believed would happen. In fact, like I said, in a worldly sense, there was probably more evidence for him to not believe it than there would be for him to believe that promise. But folks, he had a sure word from God. I mean, he had a sure word from God that would not fail. What other external evidence would Abraham even need? He's got a word from God. Who cares about the other stuff? Brethren, that's faith. And undoubtedly, it was blind. Undoubtedly, it was. Consider Noah. This is what I initially wanted to preach on. So this got left in here. Some remnants. Noah. It says, I mean, just think about this. The man built a massive boat. I'm talking like a real big boat. I don't, has anybody else other than my family ever, you've been there. Oh, I know you have. Anybody seen that ark in Louisville? Oh, you guys saw it? How big is that thing? It's huge, right? Okay, the ark was probably like half the size of the Titanic, which probably still doesn't help that much, but you know the Titanic is really big. This ark was massive. Noah built this ginormous boat based upon what? Faith. Oh, well, yeah, undoubtedly on faith, but a warning from God. You know what it says? It says it right here. Concerning events as yet unseen. Now, I don't know for sure what that is supposed to intend. Some people have said that means it had never rained. And so Noah was hearing about a flood that was going to happen from God, and yet he had never even seen rain before. Maybe. But we know for sure there was never a worldwide flood before. So no matter what, Noah was banking on something that had never been seen through the entire history of humanity. And he built this massive boat based on that, based on a word. There's going to be a worldwide flood, Noah. Well, what do you mean? There's never been a flood before. Well, there's going to be one. You better build a boat. You better build a boat. Talk about conviction of things not seen. Undoubtedly, brethren, people would have told Noah, what is this blind faith you are walking in? He was doing something that would have seemed absolutely insane to every person around him. But you know what, brethren, is that not the way that faith often is? Isn't that the case? Faith often is that way. Faith it's not calculations and measuring out and probabilities and potential outcomes and trying to weigh it out and see what has more balance than the other. Brethren, faith is purely just an act of belief in God. That's what it is. You're not weighing things out. You're just believing God. That's what faith is. Oftentimes with no cause for that faith or trust. And yet it's there because we trust in the almighty God who lives, in the supernatural working of God. That's what it is. One last thing here. I want this to be a bit of an encouragement to you. When we consider these people listed in this chapter, they walked in faith, undoubtedly, and not by sight. And you know what, brethren? It was not a fruitful or fruitless endeavor for them. They walked by faith, not by sight, and it didn't end up putting them to shame. Brethren, don't even think for a moment that you walking by faith and the labor that comes from walking by faith is ever in vain. It's not. I'm wanting you all to live a life where you are constantly operating by faith. But you know what? Many times, this is the thing that will keep us from doing so. We start to believe that maybe it'll all be for naught. We start to believe that maybe we played the fool and we attempted to walk and live by faith, only to show that in the end, that it was all in vain and it was all useless. And no doubt, this must have been a temptation for the Lord too. Undoubtedly, brethren, the Lord would have thought to himself as well, all his preaching, all his miracles, all the going about doing good. would be all for naught amongst an unbelieving people. And I say that because it actually says this in the Bible. Isaiah 49. You can see this if you want. Isaiah 49. This is in the midst of those servant songs there in Isaiah. And the words of the Lord here. Let's just see, we'll read from the start of chapter 49. Listen to me, O coastlands, and give attention, you peoples from afar. The Lord called me from the womb. So this here is undoubtedly representing the Lord Jesus Christ. You called me from the womb, from the body of my mother. He named my name. He made my mouth like a sharp sword. In the shadow of his hand he hid me. He made me a polished arrow in his quiver. He hid me away. He said to me, you are my servant Israel, in whom I will be glorified. Now listen. This is the Lord here. But I said, I have labored in vain. I have spent my strength for nothing and vanity. So the Lord in his labors in his ministry, undoubtedly in the midst of an unbelieving people, is wondering, is it all for naught? You know how it was, just like it was in the garden. He asked the Lord, the Father, is there any way that this sin issue can be dealt with other than me drinking this cup? But immediately, what does he do? Not my will, but yours be done. And he does the same thing here. The thoughts there, is it in vain? Spending my strength for nothing, for vanity? But immediately he turns and he says, yet surely my right is with the Lord. Probably meaning something like, what is due me is in the Lord's hand, right? What is rightly due him is there in the Lord's hand. And he says, my recompense or my reward is with my God. Brethren, what he did would not be in vain. It could not be in vain. Going forth in faith is never a vain thing. Listen, you know what? It's the same for us. It is astounding to me. I was talking about this with Michael maybe a week ago. It is astounding to me that I'm seeing how Paul is taking some of these Old Testament scriptures and he is applying them, well, sometimes to Christ, but sometimes he applies them to God's people. And I'm just like blown away by that. And you know what? I think Paul brings this point out. Anybody got an idea maybe where Paul brings this out? Not laboring in vain. 1 Corinthians 15:58. Here's what he says. Therefore, my beloved brothers, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that in the Lord your labor is not in vain. You see this? The Lord Jesus Christ says in Isaiah 49, I've labored in vain, I've spent my strength for nothing in vanity, yet surely my due is in his hand and my reward with my God. Undoubtedly, brethren, that was the cry of the Lord. And you know what Paul says? There it is for you, Christian. Do not believe that your labor is ever in vain. Going out in faith is no vain thing, brethren. Abel offered a sacrifice pleasing to God. It was not in vain. Brethren, he was accepted by God. Noah built that big old ark. And don't you know, for him, it was not in vain, brethren. Not in vain. Noah looked out over that ark during that flood, and he knew he did not build that thing in vain. Abraham left everything he ever knew to go to a land that he didn't even know where it was. And you know what? The blessing was all his. Joseph, by faith, told his brothers. I think this verse, it's so funny, I feel like, some of the things that it says there in the Word. I mean, Joseph told his brothers what to do with his bones. He told them, listen, you keep my bones because we're coming up out of Egypt and I'm being buried in the promised land. Don't you leave my bones here. We're leaving this place. Brethren, he was no fool. And no doubt, if we live our lives and we operate and walk by faith, brethren, the blessing will be ours. It will not be in vain. Let me pray.